Montana Territory, June 1878. The sun had not yet broken the line of mountains when Delaney Vaughn tied her boots with shaking hands and slipped out the back door of the homestead she had never truly called home. The cold bit through her thin shawl, but she did not stop. Her heart pounded with each step across the dewy grass. Behind her, in the big house, her stepfather would be waking to make good on his promise to marry her off by noon to a man twice her age, a cattle baron with 4 dead wives and no kindness in his eyes. She did not care where she was going. Only that she was going. Anywhere but here, she reached the ridge before the sun cleared the sky. Her skirts caught on brush, her breath came ragged, but she kept walking. She had no horse, no food, only a small satchel and a pistol her real father left behind before dying in a mining collapse when she was 9. Delaney crested the ridge and stumbled. Her foot slipped on loose rock and she landed hard, scraping her palms open. She sat for a second, blinking back tears. Then she heard it hooves. A single rider came around the bend below, leading a pack horse. He had a rifle across his back and dust on his coat. She scrambled to her feet, heart in her throat. "Hey," she called, lifting her hand. "Wait," the rider tugged his reins, slowed, and looked up. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with a strong jaw and steady eyes. His hat shadowed most of his face, but his voice was clear. "You hurt?" "No," she lied, wiping her hands on her skirt. "I need help." He climbed off his horse without hesitation and walked up toward her. "Name's Boone Jasper. You lost?" "I left," she said, chest tight. "I ran. They were going to force me to marry a man I do not even know. I was not going to let them." Boone looked at her, really looked. "You got anybody looking for you?" She nodded. "My stepfather. He's got riders. I need to get far from here. I need to get home. My mother's family is in Wyoming, south of Laramie." Boone let out a breath, then looked up at the sky. "That is a long ride." "You sure?" "I do not have another choice." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "All right, I will take you." Her knees almost gave. "You will?" "I said I would." He tossed her a canteen. "Let's get you on a horse." They rode hard that day, cutting through trees and keeping off the main trails. Boone said little, but he kept glancing at her like he was trying to figure something out. At dusk, he stopped near a creek and helped her down. "You holding up?" "I am fine." Her lips cracked when she smiled. "Thank you." He shrugged off his coat and handed it to her. "It will get cold tonight." They sat by the fire, eating jerky and beans from a tin. Boone fed his horses, checked his rifle, and finally sat beside her. The silence stretched, not awkward, just quiet. "You really gonna take me all the way?" she asked. He nodded. "You are not going back, I can see that, and I do not leave folks stranded." She looked at him closely. "You always help strangers, not always." His eyes met hers. "But you are not just any stranger, are you?" She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Boone hesitated, then looked back at the fire. "I remember you. Years back, you were at the 4th of July fair in Helena. You had a blue ribbon in your hair and you won the sack race." Delaney blinked. "That was me." "I was the boy who tripped at the finish and landed in the mud." She laughed, surprised. "That was you?" "Sure was. You laughed so hard I thought I might never live it down." They both smiled, the fire crackling between them. Boone looked at her again, slower this time, like he had not allowed himself to before. "You are different now," he said. "So are you." They did not say anything else, but something shifted, the kind of shift you feel deep in your chest, something steady and sure. The next morning they broke camp early. Boone led the way, teaching her how to ride steady, how to hold the reins without fighting the horse. They traveled through pine forest and open meadow, always watching the horizon. 2 days later, riders caught up with them. Delaney saw the dust cloud first and her blood ran cold. Boone pulled his rifle and handed her the reins to the pack horse. "Ride up that ridge, fast as you can. I will take care of this. You are outnumbered." "I am not planning to fight," he said. "I am planning to end it." She hesitated, eyes full. "Boone, go, Delaney." She turned and rode. Behind her she heard shouts and the crack of a warning shot, then silence. She waited on the ridge, heart pounding. 10 minutes passed, then 20. When he finally appeared, walking his horse up the slope, she ran to him. "What happened?" "They will not follow us again." She stared at him, chest heaving. "Did you?" "I did not kill anyone, just made it clear what would happen if they kept coming." She looked up at him, her voice soft. "Why are you doing this for me?" He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. His hand lingered just a second longer than it needed to. "Because you deserve better than what they were giving you. And because I remember that girl with the blue ribbon who laughed like sunshine." She blinked fast, her throat tight. "You are not what I expected." "What were you expecting?" "I do not know. Someone colder, someone who would ask for something in return." Boone stepped back, gave her space. "I do not want anything from you, not unless you want to give it." And just like that, the ache in her chest softened. They rode on, each day drawing closer to Wyoming. Each night they shared firelight and quiet stories. Boone told her about his brother who died in the war, about the ranch he lost to drought. She told him about her mother's singing voice and how she used to braid Delaney's hair before church. They did not need to say it, not yet, but it was there, in the way he helped her down from the saddle, in the way she laughed more with him than she had in years. On the 6th day, the mountains of southern Wyoming came into view. Boone pointed toward the low valley. "That where your kin live," she nodded. "The Vaughn place is just past that creek." They rode the final stretch side by side. When they reached the gate, Delaney turned to him. "You brought me home." "I said I would." She looked at him, eyes shining. "Come inside." "I do not want to impose." "You are not." She reached for his hand. "You are not a stranger anymore." He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her. "I was thinking, maybe I could stay a few days, help with the stock, make sure you are safe." She smiled. "I would like that." And for the first time since she had left Montana, Delaney felt something she had not dared hope for. She felt safe, with Boone. Delaney wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out onto the porch, the early light just beginning to warm the frost off the fence posts. The Vaughn homestead, her uncles now sat quiet under a pale Wyoming sky, the kind of stillness that made a person feel the shape of their own breath. Inside, her aunt was coaxing a fire to life beneath the breakfast stove, her cousins still asleep in the loft above. Boone had taken to sleeping in the bunkhouse out near the barn. He'd arrived a stranger and stayed on without asking for more than a place to lay his head and a job to do. In the 2 weeks since they'd arrived, he'd mended a dozen fence rails, fixed the east gate, and brought in 2 strays from out near the ravine. He never asked for thanks, just nodded when her uncle passed him work and kept on. Delaney leaned against the porch post and watched him come up the hill with a lard bucket in one hand and a limp rooster in the other. "You're not planning to eat that, are you?" she called. Boone glanced up, his mouth tugging just a little. "He's the one that's been tearing up the hens." Figured I'd make peace with him over a stew pot. She came down the steps, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You always this practical?" "I try not to waste what the land gives, even when it fights back." She walked beside him toward the pump, boots sinking in the soft earth. "You've been working harder than anyone here. You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not trying to." He set the bucket down and worked the handle, filling it with cold water. "I like keeping busy, gives me less time to think." She took the bucket from him without asking. "What kind of things?" Boone wiped his hands on his trousers and looked out toward the distant rise of hills. "Things I can't change, things I should have done different." Delaney didn't press. She carried the bucket to the porch and set it down just inside the door. When she came back out, he was rubbing the back of his neck, face turned toward the barn. "I'm not going to stay forever," he said. She nodded, though her stomach tightened. "I didn't expect you to." "I'm heading east come July. There's a man in Cheyenne who owes me wages from a cattle drive. Been putting it off too long." "I see." He looked at her then, quiet and steady. "But I'm not gone yet." "No," she said. "You're not." That evening after supper, her uncle brought out a jug of elderberry wine and the family gathered in the yard under a sky thick with stars. Someone passed Boone a fiddle, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he played. His bow moved slow, coaxing out a tune that made her aunt press a hand to her chest. Delaney sat on the porch step, listening to the lilt of it, the way his fingers knew every note like they'd traveled this road together before. When the song ended, Boone set the fiddle down beside him and didn't look up. "My mother taught me that one. She used to play when the men were gone and the wind got too loud to sleep." Delaney rose and crossed the yard, skirts brushing the grass. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat of his arm. "You don't talk about her much." "No," he said. "She died young. Consumption took her slow, and my father drank himself to sleep most nights after." Delaney folded her hands in her lap. "I didn't know. You couldn't have." He looked over at her. "You don't ask questions just to hear yourself speak. I like that." She turned her face toward the stars. "I used to think silence meant someone didn't care. Now I think it means they're carrying too much to say." Boone was quiet a long moment. Then he said, "You planning to stay here for good?" "I think so. My aunt says there's a schoolhouse being built down by the river. They'll need someone to teach come autumn. You'd be good at that." "I'd like to try. You ever think about marrying?" His voice was low, careful. She didn't turn her head. "Not the way it was put to me before, but yes, when it's right," he nodded just once. "Me too." The stars hung heavy above them. In the hush between words, her fingers brushed his, and this time he didn't move away. Later, she walked him to the edge of the yard. The night air smelled of sage and sweet clover. He paused before heading toward the bunkhouse. "Delaney," she stopped. "Yes. If I wait till after July, would you want me to stay?" She looked at him, heart full and steady. "I'd want you to stay for more than that." Boone reached up, not touching, just near enough that she felt the warmth of his hand at her cheek. "Then maybe I'll wait a while longer." She smiled, not with her mouth but with her whole being. "I'd like that." He nodded, quiet again, but his eyes held something new, something settled. Then he turned and walked back toward the barn, the grass parting beneath each sure step he took. The last days of June came with slow, steady rain. Not the kind that turned roads to soup or swelled creeks past their banks, but the kind that softened the air and made the fields smell green and clean. Boone didn't mind riding out wet to check the fence lines. He'd worked through worse. What struck him, though, was the way Delaney stood by the window each morning, one hand resting lightly on the sill, just watching the weather settle across the land like it was telling her something worth hearing. He'd meant to leave by now. That was the plan. But each morning, when he saddled his gelding, he found himself unsaddling it again by afternoon. There was always one more thing he could do: a leaning post to shore up, a calf favoring its leg. And then there was the way she looked at him across the supper table, like she wasn't waiting for anything, but still hoping for something more. That Tuesday, her uncle sent them both out to the north pasture where a young steer had gotten tangled in old wire. They rode out early, Boone leading the way, his saddle creaking in rhythm with the gait of the horse. The rain had let up, but the clouds hung low and heavy, the light flat and gray across the hills. "You ever think about owning land?" Delaney asked, her voice quiet as they rode side by side. "Used to," Boone said after a pause. "Back when I thought I'd build something with my brother, but after he died, I couldn't see it the same." She studied him from beneath her hat brim. "What would it take for you to see it again?" Boone didn't answer right away. He leaned forward and pointed ahead. "There's the steer." The animal stood awkwardly beside a thicket of chokecherry, one leg caught in a snarl of wire half buried in the scrub. Boone dismounted first and approached slow, hands low, voice calm. Delaney held the reins while he worked. The steer snorted and shifted, but Boone stayed patient, cutting away the twisted metal piece by piece until the animal limped free and trotted off, favoring the leg but upright. "Not bad," she said, handing him his canteen once he stood back up. He took a drink, then passed it back. "You're good at keeping animals calm." "I learned from my mother. She said fear spreads faster than fire, but calm can put it out." Boone looked at her, something catching behind his eyes. "You talk about her like she's still near." Delaney capped the canteen and looped it back onto her saddle horn. "I think some people stay with us longer than we expect." Not in the way we hope, maybe, but enough to guide us. Boone rested a hand on his saddle, fingers closing around the worn leather. That's how I feel about my brother. He wouldn't want me drifting forever. Delaney stepped closer. Then don't. He studied her face, sharp in places, soft in others. You're asking me to stay. I'm not, she said. Not unless you want to. The wind picked up, brushing her skirt against his leg. Boone reached out, slow and sure, and tucked a lock of damp hair behind her ear. I want to, he said. They rode back without speaking, but something had changed between them. Not a spark, something deeper. A decision made without needing to be said again. That evening, Boone didn't head toward the bunkhouse. He came into the main house after supper, nodding when her uncle offered him a chair near the hearth. The youngest cousin passed him a plate of cornbread without being asked. Her aunt poured him coffee without waiting for a reply. After the meal, Delaney stood from her place at the table. I have something I want to show you, she said to Boone. He followed her outside, boots scuffing against the porch planks. She led him around the house to a narrow path bordered by young cottonwoods. The air was damp, the leaves still dripping from the morning's rain. Back here, she said, pushing aside a low branch. They came into a clearing, a small patch of open land where the grass had been cut and turned, the dirt still dark and rich. I was thinking of planting, she said. Not much. Just enough to feed a few more mouths. Boone knelt, running a hand through the soil. You've got good earth here. I want to build something steady, something that lasts longer than a season. When he stood, she was watching him with quiet certainty. I'll stay, he said, not just for now. If you'll have me, I will, Delaney said, but not because I need saving. He stepped closer. I know that. She reached for his hand, fingertips brushing his. Then let's build it together. He answered by lacing his fingers with hers, the gesture simple, sure. He didn't kiss her, not yet. But he held her hand a long time, while the dusk settled around them and the first stars broke open above the trees. Boone rose just after first light, the sky still pale and streaked with thin mist. He left his boots by the door and stepped quietly into the kitchen, not wanting to wake anyone. Delaney was already there, sleeves rolled to her elbows, shaping a ball of dough against a floured board. She didn't look up right away, but he could tell she'd heard him. There's coffee on the stove, she said, voice low. He poured a cup, the enamel tin warm in his hand. You always up this early? Only when I dream too much, she said, brushing flour from her fingers. I needed something to do with my hands. Boone leaned against the doorframe, watching the way her shoulders moved with each press of the dough. What kind of dream? She glanced at him then, not startled, just worn at the edges. The kind where I'm back in Helena and the doors are locked, I can't get out and nobody's listening. He crossed the room and set his cup down. You're not there anymore, I know, she said, softer. But sometimes part of me forgets. He reached for the bread pan and held it steady while she settled the dough inside. That part'll quiet down in time. Delaney nodded, then turned to rinse her hands. I want to help your forgetting too, Boone. He looked at her, unsure what she meant. You carry things, she continued, drying her hands on a linen cloth. Losses you don't name. I see it in the way you walk the fence line twice, even when it's sound. Boone didn't speak right away. He stirred his coffee and watched the steam curl. I had a sweetheart once, he said finally. Before the war ended. Her name was Rose. I was 19. Thought I'd marry her once I came back. Delaney waited, saying nothing. She didn't wait, he said. No reason she should have. Folks told her I was dead. She married a banker in Bozeman. I saw them once years later. She had 2 boys. Looked happy. Delaney folded the cloth and set it on the counter. Did you love her? I did, he said. But I think mostly I loved the idea of something staying the same. She stepped closer, the morning hush wrapping around them like a held breath. I'm not her, she said plainly. I know that. And I won't promise not to change, but I won't leave when things get hard. Boone's jaw tightened, not in anger but in something harder to name. He reached for her hand, not tentative but sure. Then I won't leave either. They spent the morning working side by side. Boone repaired the porch rail that had started to rot through near the bottom, and Delaney boiled lye soap in a kettle behind the house. her hair pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed bonnet. Neither said much after the kitchen, but something had settled between them like a stone laid into earth. By mid-afternoon, a wagon rolled up the lane, the wheels crunching dry gravel. It was the Reverend from down by the river, a circuit preacher who came through once every few weeks with mail, news, and the occasional book for her cousins. Delaney met him at the hitching post. "Brought something for you," he said, his voice warm with dust and years. "Letter from a Miss Delaney Vaughn. Postmark says Omaha." Delaney blinked, taking the envelope with both hands. "Thank you." Boone watched from the porch as she opened it, her eyes moving fast across the page. She didn't smile, but her mouth softened and she held the paper to her chest for a moment before folding it again. "She's all right?" Boone asked once the Reverend had gone. "She is," Delaney said, tucking the letter into her apron pocket. "She's working as a seamstress now. Says she found her voice again." Boone nodded, then looked toward the barn. "I've been thinking about building onto the bunkhouse, something more permanent." Delaney tilted her head. "You planning on staying that long?" "I'm planning on not leaving," he said. She stepped down from the porch and joined him in the yard. "Then we'd better make space for a second bed." He raised an eyebrow. "For guests," she said, but the corner of her mouth lifted just slightly. That night, after the lanterns were blown out and the house settled into sleep, Boone sat on the back step with Delaney beside him, her shoulder pressed to his. The moon hung low and yellow above the hills. "I don't think I knew what peace looked like," he said. "Not really." And now, he looked at her, the lines of her face lit soft by moonlight. "Now I see it clear as anything." She reached for his hand and held it steady. They didn't speak again. They didn't need to. The night held them quiet, and for the first time in years, neither of them dreamed of past doors or unspoken names. Only of land warming beneath their feet and days still unfolding. The 1st of July brought a dry wind from the west, lifting the scent of sun-warmed pine from the hills and stirring the wheat grass into long, sighing waves. Boone rose early and met Delaney at the edge of the field behind the house, where a rough square of land waited, freshly turned and eager for seed. "I found a hand plow in the lean-to," he said, adjusting his gloves. "Handle's cracked, but it'll hold a while yet." Delaney knelt beside a burlap sack and opened it to reveal a neat handful of beans, corn, and squash seeds. "My uncle's wife traded for these last week. Said they'd do better in high soil. You aim to try the Three Sisters method." "My mother's people planted that way," she said, standing. "Corn for the stalk, beans to climb, squash to shade the roots. They said it kept the earth from growing lonely." Boone looked at her a long moment. "Your mother was Cherokee?" "Half," she said. "Her mother walked the trail from Georgia, settled near Laramie before the war. She didn't talk about it much, but she knew how to listen to the land." "You ever meet her?" "I remember her hands," Delaney said, "and the way she sang when it rained. Low and quiet, like she was coaxing something to grow." They worked side by side, Boone guiding the plow through the soil, Delaney following behind with careful steps, dropping seeds into the furrows. The sun climbed slow, and the air stayed still, filled only with the rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of a meadowlark. By midday, Boone wiped his brow with the crook of his arm and leaned against the plow. "You ever think about having a place of your own?" Delaney paused, then pushed a small mound of soil over the last seed. "I used to think I'd always be living in someone else's house. Now, I'm starting to imagine rooms I could call mine. My brother and I used to talk about a house with a porch facing west," Boone said. "Said we'd watch the sun fall behind the hills, not the other way around." Delaney stepped closer, brushing dirt from her palms. "Would you still want that?" "I would," he said, "but not alone." She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Then let's build toward it." That night, Boone asked her uncle if he might court Delaney proper. Her uncle didn't blink, only nodded once and poured him a glass of rye from a clay jug near the hearth. "She's been steadier since you came," he said. "Just make sure you stay that way too." The following Sunday, they rode together to the river bend where the new schoolhouse walls were rising. The preacher was there, hammering boards into place while two farmers wrestled with the roof beams. Delaney walked through the open frame, fingers trailing along the raw wood. Boone watched her from outside, his hand resting on the saddle horn. "I think I'll start in September," she said when she came back to him. "There's 3 children in the valley already and more coming." "You'll be good at it," Boone said. "You've got a way of making people want to try." She looked at him then, not with softness but with something rooted. "So do you." In the weeks that followed, Boone finished repairs on the bunkhouse and began drawing plans for a cabin on the ridge where the wind carried the scent of juniper. He bartered for lumber with a rancher downriver, offering to break a team of mules in exchange. Delaney picked wild mint and hung it to dry in bundles from the rafters. She stitched curtains from an old muslin dress and packed away her mother's Bible in a cedar box. They didn't speak of promises, but everything they did built toward them. On the first clear morning of August, Boone walked into the kitchen while Delaney was kneading bread. "I spoke with the preacher," he said. She looked up, flour on her cheek. "And?" He said he'd come next Sunday, just the family. "Nothing big." Delaney wiped her hands and stepped around the table. "You sure?" "I've never been more." She touched his face, her thumb brushing the line of his cheek. "Then so am I." They were married beneath the cottonwoods, her uncle holding a clean hat in his hands, her cousins fidgeting in their boots. Her aunt wept quietly while Boone stood with his palms open, the sun catching the edge of his collar. Delaney wore a pale green dress, simple and neat, and a string of carved bone beads her grandmother had left behind. When the preacher said the words, Boone didn't blink. He held her gaze like it was the first and last thing he'd ever need to see. Afterward, they ate blackberry pie and passed around a jug of cider. Her uncle gave Boone a brace of tools and a pair of mended boots. Her aunt wrapped up a quilt she'd sewn in secret, each square stitched from a different scrap of Delaney's childhood. That night, Boone carried her across the threshold of the bunkhouse not because it was custom, but because she'd been on her feet all day and he wanted to. She laughed, surprised, and he kissed her gently before setting her down. The fire crackled low in the hearth. The bed was simple, warm with clean linen and the scent of cedar. Boone drew the curtain and Delaney dimmed the lantern. They held each other in the hush, every breath drawn slow, every touch steady and sure, no fear. No doubt. Only the sound of wind against the door and the heartbeat of a life beginning. Years later, children's voices echoed through the cottonwoods. Delaney taught letters in the schoolhouse by the river, her youngest daughter often asleep in her arms by the final bell. Boone built the cabin on the ridge with his own hands, and the porch faced west. Just like he'd always dreamed, in the evenings, they sat together and watched the sun sink behind the hills, their fingers laced without needing to be, and nothing ever pulled them apart again.